Welcome to Ladies of Another View. I'm here today with Carmen and Lori, and I am Patty. Later on in the show, we're going to visit with Beth Brelge from Epoch Times, and she's going to talk about the education situation where political agenda has been become more important than education. And we're also going to talk about what's going on across the country with CO2 pipelines, because that's been a big issue here in North Dakota. But it's also been going controversial in other parts of the country, and one area of the country has shut down the pipeline going in. And later on, for the lighter side, we're going to talk about a little bit about beard history and the world's longest beard. So you don't want to miss that one. But first, we have the privilege of having on today retired Army General Chase Spears, who is he's talking about the woke military and how it's hurting us. Welcome to the show, Chase.
Hey, great. I appreciate having me, Patty. And one quick correction: I didn't make general. I'm a retired major, but still very glad to be here.
Did I say general? You know what? We're talking about a general later on. I knew you were major. So retired major. Yes. I wish you would have been general, because maybe you could have talked a little sense into a few people up there. But major is high enough, because the reason I'm having you on the show is you're writing a lot. You're into communications. You have a lot of advanced degrees, including you're working on your PhD in communication right now, right?
I am.
Science of communication. And you're writing about what you saw in the military, in the Army specifically, when it comes to a woke agenda. So let's go over a few things first of all. You had made a statement in one of your articles that just because you put on a uniform, it doesn't mean you lose all your rights as an American, right?
That's absolutely correct. And unfortunately, that's largely lost on a whole lot of the populace. When I was a soldier, and I did this for 20 years, the thing that we were always kind of taught is you go into the military, you set aside your rights, you learn how to shut your mouth, and you just do what you're told, and you serve at the pleasure of kind of the executive. And one day, as a lieutenant, I was at Arlington National Cemetery, and I don't know if any of you have been to where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is, but as part of this, wonderful, wonderful structure that the tomb is part of, you look up and you see this quote from George Washington: "We did not lay aside the citizen to assume the soldier." And it struck me. I went home and I immediately looked it up. I started researching it. I started reading it, because it was so against everything that I had been taught in the military. And that was really where I began to realize we are still citizens. There are limitations that we have that we accept, and regulation and law very clearly specifies what they are. But what we are taught is often very, very different. And that goes into what I'm actually researching in my dissertation work. Is there's a wide gulf between what people think we give up and what, by regulation and law, we actually give up. And I felt that especially clearly in the last 2 to 3 years of my career with the COVID mandate. And at the end of the day, we all retain some bodily autonomy. And I had friends who were, people who had known me for 20 plus years in the civilian realm saying, "Well, you joined the military, right? You gave up your rights, right? You're just supposed to do what you're told to do, right?" And it was very jarring to hear it said that clearly, and realize that this whole idea has escaped the military and has now gone into the public. And I see it in a lot of Twitter conversations. And so that's really prompted me to dig into this and try to help people understand, when you join the military, you are still a citizen. We're not mercenaries. We still have a stakeholder stake in the republic. And it's important that we don't forget that as a nation.
Well, I'm gonna push back a little bit here, because I grew up with a World War II dad, and he didn't like Patton. A lot of people love Patton. He didn't like him, but he always came across like that. You go into the military, you got a boss, and you better follow the boss, or you're going to be in a lot of trouble. And I assume that it's kind of still that way. Or, let's say, we were talking about some of the woke policies in the military now. If I object to being a roommate with somebody who's transitioning, let's say, do I have a right in the military to say, I'm not going to do this? Or explain some of what you mean, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Sure. Should you as a citizen have a right to say who you do or don't live with? We would absolutely say that. For example, Carmen, if you were wanting to, you would choose who you rent a house with, for example, or who you want to try to get an apartment with. That would not have been something controversial even just a few years ago in the military, that if someone lives a lifestyle that you have significant disagreement with, that you could probably talk to your leadership and you would not be demonized and you would not be kind of demagogued for that. In today's military, if you were roommates, if you were barracks mates with a service member who was, as you say, going through a so-called transition process, and you brought that up as a concern and said, this is not something that I'm comfortable sharing my living arrangements with, you are running a very, very high risk, depending on your commander, of being just absolutely labeled every negative thing imaginable and potentially having action taken against you for discrimination, which is not the way this republic is supposed to work.
Right, right.
So where do you think all this wokeness, and when did it kind of start that you noticed?
So I've been in 20 years, or I was in for 20 years, which is a mere blip on the historical timeline. But the institution that I joined and the institution that I departed from were markedly different, to the point that I don't recognize. What I observed during my time in is it really kind of began during the Obama years. President Obama, who's someone that I very much disagree with in terms of his policy issues, you have to give him credit. He absolutely understood how to use institutions, how to use large bureaucracies and organizations to perpetuate your perspectives and your policy practices. And up until that point in time, the military had still been pretty unassailable to progressives. The military still remained largely conservative. It remained largely focused on matters of national defense and U.S. national security strategy. President Obama realized, if we can change that, we can then use the military and point to the military as an example to the rest of society to drag people who doubt along with us, because the military is very highly trusted. Who doesn't want to believe that the military wants good for the nation and serves the nation? So that's where I really began to see it. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I noticed there was a big change of inertia at that point in time. And I recall when President Obama undid Don't Ask, Don't Tell, he promised, hey, this does not mean we're going to bring transgenderism issues into the military. Well, how do you know a politician is lying if their lips are moving?
Yeah,
So
there you go.
Exactly.
Hey, when we
Yeah.
come back, we need to take a break. I want to talk more about that, when it started to change, and also take a look at some of the people that were instrumental in that change. So don't go away. Welcome back to Ladies of Another View, and we've been visiting with retired Army Major Chase Spears, talking about how the military has gone woke, and he was with the military in the Army for 20 years, so he knows what's going on. He's seen the change. Welcome back.
No, thanks. Looking forward to continuing the conversation.
So when we left off, you were talking about Obama stopped the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, right? To say, no, this is all okay. But if you're not comfortable, you can just speak up. We're not going to force anything on anybody. But that didn't stay that way, did it?
No, not at all. I remember when that policy changed, every general officer who had troops under their command, they were required to be the ones to give the training. And I remember the day up in Anchorage, Alaska, I sat in a briefing room. Our two-star general gave the training. And at one point I asked him, I said, sir, are you telling me that if the family readiness group is having an event and a soldier shows up with a member of the same sex that they are now claiming is their spouse, unofficially, that the family readiness group is required to absolutely treat that person exactly the way that they say they should be treated? And he said, yes, that's what I'm saying. And I thought, that's really, you're creating an immediate point of friction for families. You're not just saying, we want everyone to feel welcomed and accepted. In the military, you want everyone to feel a part of the team. You want everyone to feel like they can contribute, like their leadership's going to look out for them and treat them with respect, treat them with dignity. But that's not what you're doing. You're simply substituting one set of morality for another. And it was very clear from the outset that the progressive morality was going to be the new way moving forward. And that if you were holding on to traditional morality, your days of being able to speak that were likely numbered. And I found very quickly those numbers were very short.
So when you were seeing all these changes, what happened then? You retired. I don't know if you retired early because you'd had enough or what, but how has your life changed now that you're, I don't know, free from the military? What are you doing with your time? How are you getting your message out?
Yeah, I retired just about 10 weeks ago, right at the 20-year mark. I had actually been selected for promotion to lieutenant colonel, and my family and I decided that our peace of mind was worth more than the rank and the pay raise that went with it. It's been a relief, quite honestly. I loved the Army. I got to serve with some amazing people. I got to do some things that I never imagined possible. I had some of the most fun. Now, I had some of the most pain as well, and I still feel a lot of that daily in certain joints. But it was a great adventure so much of the time. But the last 3 years, the political atmosphere became just so untenable. We had the Secretary of Defense, himself a retired general, so he's by no means a man who was oppressed, calling anyone who held to traditional morality, equating us to potential extremists. Well, how does that make you feel like you're a part of a team? How does that make you feel like your leadership is looking out for you? It has the absolute opposite effect. And I was a military spokesman in my role. I was a public affairs officer. And it was just clear to me, I can no longer speak for this institution. We are just in too great a point of friction, and it's something that will not be overcome this side of a couple of changes worth of generations of military leadership and some very firm direction from the White House and Congress. And so since being out, it's been a great relief. I always thought I would miss the Army earlier in my career. We planned on doing 30 years. But every day I wake up and I get to control what I want to do. So it's been nice to have the creative expression. The things that I write now, by regulation, by law, I absolutely could write them on active duty. By practice, by culture, it would be absolutely impossible. The amount of stress I'd be put under would just be absolutely untenable. So it's a great relief to be able to have my creative freedom. And I filled the time this last fall with quite a bit of teaching. I took on a rather heavy teaching load doing adjunct work at a local Christian high school and a local Christian college. And that just wrapped up. And so now I'm full-time into my dissertation work for the next few months and looking for ways to continue engaging with people through whatever means are offered to me to kind of spread the message that we need the public to pay more attention to their military, to get involved with their lawmakers. Because if you lose the military, sooner or later, you're going to lose the republic. And people have to get engaged on this.
Right. And so were you talking about General Milley earlier? I guess, there's that whole piece. He was very influential in a lot of things. Can you address that?
Well, let's explain who he is, because because you wrote about him, that he has been heralded as just a great hero. He was retired as chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, but really he's left a legacy that isn't really that great, that affects the military.
General Milley, unfortunately, my charge is he really transformed the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs into the office of military czar. He expanded the role of the office. He's directly set himself between the president and the chain of command. To be clear, by law, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is not in the chain of command. The chairman is the president's military advisor. General Milley didn't see it that way. He saw himself as a savior of the Republic, and he was very open about it. He bragged about it. He spoke at length with Bob Woodward about it. Just in the few days before he retired, he had a long, glowing piece in The Atlantic written by Jonah Goldberg, again proclaiming him as a white knight, savior of the Republic. He dragged the military farther into politics than anyone has done, probably since any general of the Second World War, and it was greatly to the detriment of American trust.
And recruitment is down. This is the bad thing. We've got like 30 seconds, but everything we just talked about in last segment, in this segment, is having real effects. You left 10 years earlier than originally planned, and recruitment is down, right?
It is, yeah. The Army is now in its third year of missing recruiting goals by a sizable margin. Last year, I was on the press desk at Recruiting Command in Kentucky on a 4-month stint, and we missed recruiting by 25%. And that was after the Army significantly lowered the initial target goal. People are seeing that the military is no longer something that you can take for granted as a trusted institution, and they're voting with their feet and they're going elsewhere. Admittedly, it's a complex problem. There are many factors at play, but you can't escape the political factor. But senior military leadership is doing everything they can to pretend that political factor doesn't exist.
Well, thank you for joining us so much. We really appreciate it, and I'd love to have you on again. I know this is going to be an ongoing topic. So when we come back, we're going to talk with a reporter from Epoch News about some of the anti-Semitism going on college campuses. So don't go away.